Gajarah is essentially a flower assembly. It's a bracelet that's made from jasmine, motia, from roses, and from sometimes we'll add marigold to it, sometimes we'll add different embellishments to it. We wear it on our wrists, we wear Gajarah in our hair. It carries very deep spiritual resonance for us. It's a symbol of beauty and tradition and culture. So it's very defiant in holding the one truth, which is that there are many truths. Language is such a powerful, such an important part of our identity. It's who we are. It's how we express ourselves. It's how we modify who we are in different settings. The jokes feel different. The jokes land differently. And the things, the humor, the music, the sounds, all of it feels so very different. Healing absolutely is not linear. It's not simple. It's messy, ragey, it's sloppy. And that's very much the reality of healing.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Stories and Stanza. Today, I have a fantastic guest who is a writer and is working on her first novel. Please join me in welcoming Somia Sadiq for this episode. Hi, Somia. How are you doing today?
Good, good. I'm doing well. Thanks for having me today. Looking forward to it.
You are my first guest from Pakistan, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from you because there are some interesting topics of discussion which I guess we'll see how that flows into our conversation. We'll of course keep it focused on your book, but then in Stories and Stanza, when I speak to writers, it's not just the book, the writer's thinking, personality and craft and experiences that matter a lot in the discussion. So I look forward to hearing from you. And for our listeners today, would you like to give a brief introduction?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll just start by saying I'm happy to be your first Pakistani on the podcast. Always happy to represent the homelands that I come from, and I hope I can do my home justice as well as reflect on it within the context of the book. I'm a Pakistani Canadian entrepreneur, writer, I'm an impact assessment professional. A lot of the work that I do with different communities is rooted in where I come from and my worldview and my way of being. And that is very much that drives all the work that I do. I'm happy to be here.
That's wonderful. And I guess I just mentioned the cultural identity bit in the beginning because I tend to have a very different perspective from a lot of people around me. Okay, so
Mm.
historically, I mean, I have had no friends from Pakistan, but when I moved to Australia, I started making friends from from people from Pakistan, and I noticed that they're really good, really generous, really funny, and I in today's world I see a lot of hatred, a lot of identity crisis in people, and I tend to believe that the time will remember us by what legacy we leave behind, how we think and how we show the world that we can make it a better place. So that, I guess, it will unfold through our conversation today. But let's
Mhm.
talk about the book first, and then we
Sure.
will get into some of these areas. So please tell us about the book that you are writing and what made you write the book.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I wrote Gajarah as an invitation to find language about complex things. As a peace negotiator, as a peace builder in the work that I do, there are many different versions of the truth. And there are many different versions of the story, many different perspectives. And the more I work in this very humbling space, the more I realize that we don't have language that helps us understand that ground in the middle. So one of my quotes, one of my favorite quotes from Rumi is, "Out beyond the ideas of wrongdoing and right doing is a field. I'll meet you there." And when I think about that field, I think about all the different realities that can be true in that field. And how do we describe what that looks like? So I wrote Gajarah as very much trying to find a language that can explain the different complexities of the human experience and complexities of life, and do it in a manner that is very much anchored in storytelling as a mechanism for healing, for growth, for transformation. That's what inspired it. And I'm very keen to hear how people receive it.
It's wonderful. And from what I have read about your book so far, I think it's beautifully poetic. And the idea that you mentioned, it just builds it, it just augments it so well. So, for listeners, do you want to explain a little bit about selecting the title and why you chose the title, what it means, and how it speaks to the story?
Absolutely. So Gajarah, so for the listeners who are not from South Asia, Gajarah is essentially a flower assembly. It's a bracelet that's made from jasmine, motia, from roses, gulab, and from, sometimes we'll add marigold to it, sometimes we'll add different embellishments to it. We wear it on our wrists, we wear Gajarah in our hair. It carries very deep spiritual resonance for us. It's a symbol of beauty and tradition and culture. It's very much a symbol of celebration, of new beginnings, and so many more things. In the book, Gajarah is very much a symbol of the different complexities of life, the different periods of life. So the book is set up in three parts. Part one is called Motia, which is one part of the Gajarah. Part two is called Gulab, roses, which is the second part of the book. And part three is called Genda, which is marigold, which is also a part of the Gajarah. I chose this very much because I wanted the book to carry, yes, complexities, different difficult themes, but also have the story be told in a very poetic, lyrical, evocative way, and have the story evoke a lot of those beauty and beauty related emotions in folks as well. Hence the name Gajarah.
And I request this to anyone joining Stories and Stanza who is a writer, that if we are talking about a book, then I request the writer, if they would like to read anything from the book. And
Sure.
it the idea is that give the readers a hint of what the book is about. And the reason why I ask the guest to do it, because I think that every writer writes from a voice in their head. So when the writer is reading some text that they have come up with, they can reflect or they can articulate the voice in their head. So there is, of course, the creative voice, there is the craft, and there is the messaging. But when the writer reads their own work, there is certain beauty in that in that shape and form. So I leave it up to you what you want to pick, what you want to share with our listeners today.
Sure. Thank you, Abra. So before I share this, I'll tell the listeners that Gajarah is a story of a young girl. She's born in Sharjah. She spends her summers on her rooftops with her aunties and uncles and her grandmothers in Lahore, Pakistan. And then she eventually moves to Canada and navigates a very challenging reality of identity and belonging, what that means. And Iman, the protagonist, is this incredibly big-spirited, joyful, mischievous kid. And that's sort of very much the character. But under that very spirited exterior, she carries the weight of childhood trauma and how she navigates that trauma throughout the life and makes sense of the challenge, if you will. So what I would like to read here is, this comes from a chapter that's called Pardes de Pardesi Rang, which is a Punjabi expression, which means the foreign colors of a foreign land. And it's Iman reflecting on all the things about this new land that she doesn't understand, that don't make sense to her. So I'll read a small portion of that so you can hear the struggle in her head as she's trying to make sense of the new reality. I don't understand this foreign land. It doesn't speak to me. Perhaps I must get to know it first. But how? As he held me at the airport, Baba Jani had said that as I entered the white man's world, I must pay attention, watch, observe, learn, and speak carefully, that I must never forget who I am. No matter where we go with it, we are birds that always know the path back to our nests. Your nest will always welcome you with open arms, he had said, with a tear-streaked face as he kissed my forehead. Rabb rakha putter, may God protect you, little one. But I couldn't hear my God here. I couldn't hear myself here. I couldn't be me here. To find beauty in this darkness in this foreign land, I must quieten myself, I decide. So quieten myself I do. My Quran bothers them, so I recite it in whispers. My bangles bother them, so I wear them only at home. My spices bother them, so I never share my food. My food bothers them, so I keep them out of my kitchen and stay out of theirs. My colors bother them, so I stop wearing them. My perfume bothers them, so I start wearing theirs. My language bothers them, so I learn to speak like them. My clothes bother them, so I wear theirs. My presence bothers them, so I make myself invisible. My stories bother them, so I stop telling them. My songs bother them, so I stop singing. My voice bothers them, so I keep it to myself. Pardes, a foreign land, is where I am, and I will learn to live here, I decide. Someday I will meet my host, I decide. I have my words, my magic. I have my laughter. I am guided by my ancestors. I have been prepared for this, I know. I will learn the rules, I decide, and learn them well, well enough to dare to bend them, break them, or leave them behind.
Thank you. That is so beautiful, and it flows as such wonderful poetry. And I noticed that you use poetry and prose beautifully in your book. And how did you come up with that idea, and how did you weave that into the world you created?
Yeah, thank you. I think in a lot of ways, for the way that I've written is very much the way that the voice in my head works. So I appreciated when we started the conversation today, you talked about the voice of the writer being the voice in their head. When I write prose, it's very much a poetic reflection, if you will. And in writing it, I've often found myself writing in short punchy sentences, and that's sort of the style of writing that I've always had. And then I've always written these short stories, and I think I have like hundreds of poems that I've written over the years. And I thought this would be a beautiful way to bring them together as the creative illustration. The different types of writing and different modes of expression can work together, which is very much in line with the theme of the book.
This is like the choice between prose and poetry. It's a very interesting one, even for me, because
Mm,
I like to believe that I am more of a poet than a prose writer.
mm,
Like whenever I
mhm.
write prose, I think some elements of poetry automatically comes in. Like
It's true.
when you are writing poetry, you are deep into that messaging that you get absorbed into that. Whereas in prose, sometimes probably you need to be a little bit more superficial, and then there is this show and tell element that you just don't
Mm,
say, you show the readers that
mm,
this is the world. You do not say that your character is thinking, you show that with their
right.
actions and their word, right? So how do you balance the two
Mm,
technicalities? Like if you are writing poetry, then you are in a different world, and if you are writing prose, you are probably in a different world. Feel free to correct
yeah,
if I am
of
wrong.
course.
I'm just curious to understand your point of view here.
Sure. I'll say there's no such thing as incorrect in this case. That's the beauty of creative expression. I think if I think about poetry that I've always been drawn to, I'm a I'm a super fan of Sufi kalam, and some of the incredible poets. Like I love the work that Allama Iqbal has written. I love the old works of like Bulleh Shah, for example. I think when we think of poetry, we almost expect that two lines in a poem will carry a lot of different meanings and different interpretations and different ways of seeing. Poetry we consider to be art that packs a lot of punch in a line, assembly of words. And somehow the expectation shifts when we write in prose. And in prose, like you said, show and tell, we almost expect that you need to say more in order for the reader to understand. And I think, in a way, perhaps trying to challenge that a little bit to say, could we write in a way that even prose can carry multiple meanings, multiple expressions based on what the listener, the reader, and their lived experience and their way of being is. So it's a bit of a challenge, if you will, for the reader to then engage with the poems with just as much freedom of their own experience and understanding as they would with the prose part of the book.
And we are living in a world where, like, if you see the fictions, it's more genre fiction than literary
Mm-hmm.
fiction, right? And where do you see your book as? Is it in genre fiction or is it in literary fiction?
So it falls, what's interesting is this is my first time writing a novel. So I'm learning a lot about the different genres. I was I was having a conversation with a very dear friend who went to school to learn how to write and how to create a story arc and so on. And she was great because she was giving me a good sense of like, where does this book fall? What does it look like? And so on. And we concluded that this book is really a mix of genres. So it's very defiant in holding the one truth, which is that there are many truths. And that applies to the nature of the topic. It applies to how the book is written. It applies to the the poetry prose combinations. Well, this book is a work of fiction. It's literary fiction. It very much follows some of the principles of literary fiction. How closely? I don't know. I think that's going to be for a lot of the reviewers and experts, if you will, to see. It's written from a very lived experience voice, a very lived experience perspective. And I think that'll shine through.
Yes, I asked that because I speak to writers who are in different areas of
Mm,
creative writing, and then everybody identifies themselves with a certain genre. Some will say that
right.
I prefer to write in this, or I see writing today taking this certain
Mm,
direction. So, of course, there is no one right answer to it. I was
hmm
just curious as to where do you see your book fitting in? Like, there is no one
hmm
right or wrong answer. And then when I interview a writer, I learn so much from every writer that I interview because everyone has a version that they want to talk about and they
mm,
believe in. So that is what makes more sense to me. So there's no one answer that it has to flow into this particular genre or this particular style. Going back to your writing style, I noticed something, and that's something I heard from one of my
mm,
friends who I helped publish her first collection of short stories. I like how you used a lot of phrases from your own language into this. Is a very similar question she asked me, that there is no one translated version of the word that I can use in my writing. It just wouldn't feel the same. And I
yeah.
like, so first of all, of course, the title there, and
Hmm.
all the name of the flowers and all these emotions, relationships, all of that, how you used it in the book. And I think that speaks volume about the character of the book, the style of the book, the narrative of the book.
Mhm.
Do you want to share something about that? Why you chose to write in that way,
Mm,
and
mm.
how do you think that worked in your book?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I was very deliberate about incorporating Punjabi and Urdu phrases. Language is such a powerful, such an important part of our identity. It's who we are, it's how we express ourselves, it's how we modify who we are in different settings. We, I often reflect on, you know, when I'm visiting home and spending time with my family, I'm immersed in my language all day long. The jokes feel different, the jokes land differently, and the things, the humor, the music, the sounds, all of it feels so very different. There was a time I remember a few years ago in Canada where we were in, my husband and I were out at some place and we heard this Hindi song, Genda Nana, and or Punjabi song rather, Genda Nana. And that was the first time that I had actually heard my music in a public setting. And I just remember the very strong emotions that it evoked in me. And I realized just how important it was, how important language was to my identity. So it was very important for me to find a powerful way to incorporate language. So that was one. The challenge, as you've noted already, is Punjabi as a language, Urdu as a language, and this applies to a lot of different languages. Each word can carry so many different meanings. So, for example, there's a chapter in the book called Tishnagi, and Tishnagi, the only word in English that comes close is perhaps longing. Yet, if we think of the word Tishnagi in how it's used in a poetic context, it's that gutting restlessness that comes from being thirsty in the middle of a desert and not knowing where you're going to be and how far away you are from a drop of water to nourish your soul, which is so many words to describe that one word. So in a lot of ways, when I've incorporated these phrases in Punjabi, I've offered small translations, if you will, in the text. But I definitely wrestled with, how do I describe this one word? I've been very fortunate that I have an incredible editing crew, and they really worked with me to retain a lot of the different meanings of the word. So if there's a Punjabi word, it's not just one English word that describes it. There's multiple words to try and get to the overall context of that word. So I hope that with readers and with listeners, that they're able to get to the heart of the word as close to the word as possible.
And I think that the words that you choose that gives all these identities to the characters and the book.
Mhm.
And you mentioned that you used words from Punjabi, you used words from Urdu. I want to hear from you as to how you see the cultural identities of the characters. Like, is it
Mm.
more individualism or is it more of a melting pot of multiple cultures flowing through the
Mm.
story? How do you see that?
Yeah, thank you for that question. The characters, given the nature of the story itself, like Iman is born in Sharjah in the Middle East and then ends up spends summers in Lahore, like I said, and then ends up in Canada. It's reflecting on Iman comes from a collectivist culture. So her identity is very much rooted in an understanding of the identity of the collective and the expectations of the collective and responsibilities towards the collective and responsibilities and obligations of the collective towards her. So that's how that's who she is. And then it gets, when she's reflecting on some of the early years in Sharjah, the Emirates being this melting pot of different backgrounds and places, she's very much exposed to such a rich fabric of people and different languages. And there's a part in the book that I was really excited to write about where Iman's family lives with two other families in their little apartment. And one of them is from Sri Lanka and one of them is from the Philippines. So she's very much growing up being with people from many different backgrounds and ways of being and religions and identities. So that's very much a theme that progresses through the book. So it's not just Iman's cultural background, it's very much the cultural backgrounds of others as well.
You mentioned in the beginning that you used elements of trauma and
Mm-hmm.
healing in the book. And I want to hear from you as to what your view on healing is, because
Mm-hmm.
healing is not a straight line in
Mm-mm-mm.
today's world, right? It works differently for different people. And then we need to be mindful about our past and identities to
Mm-hmm.
make sure that we are healing in the right ways, just like we cannot erase the past, is what I mean. So we need to be compassionate with the past, yet we need to heal and look
Mm-hmm.
forward to a better future, a better tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
So I am curious to hear your views on what are some of the trauma elements that you
Mm-hmm.
incorporate in your book, and what does healing look like for your characters in the book? How did
Mm-hmm.
you work on that?
Yeah, so the Iman's journey is very much a journey of healing from many types of traumas from throughout her life. And in the course of her life, she also meets others who carry their own traumas. So in a way, she's experiencing, she's carrying her own while also carrying and observing other people's traumas that explain, in some cases, some of their behavior, some of their reactions. There's this phrase in when we work with different communities as a peace negotiator that says when we do the work in a trauma informed way, we reflect on not like what is wrong with you. Our expression is what happened to you. We try to understand the why of someone's behavior. And that helps us explain, helps us understand why someone expresses, why someone hurts. People who are hurt will hurt others. So healing absolutely is not linear. It's not simple. It's messy, ragey, it's sloppy. And that's very much the reality of healing. Healing requires us to dig deep. It's so much easier, which is going to sound somewhat controversial, but it is so much easier to be angry and to ignore and to avoid and walk away. It is so much harder to engage and work through and wrestle with things together. And that applies to trauma as well. So in the book, Iman very much tries to understand and make sense of the different traumas and what those mean to her, to a point where she decides whether or not she can forgive, what forgiveness looks like. She wrestles with grief, and then she realizes that grief needs something else from her. So in a lot of ways, these elements of forgiveness and grief and anger almost take on a human personality, if you will. And Iman engages in questions with these different characters, if you will. So all that to say, Gajarah is an invitation for people to find ways to heal and to just accept that healing is going to be messy. It's going to be complicated. It'll take time. And we need to heal to be able to move forward and heal in a manner that we can love that inner child in us so deeply with so much kindness and compassion that not only do we accept, we genuinely love that inner child in us and take that healing with us for the generations to come.
That is wonderful. And I look forward to reading your book and understand this. And it's very important that we, as creators, we present this view to the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to hear from you that in your book, there is certain creative element and there are
Mm-hmm.
lived experiences that become part of the book. So how do you see this book as a reflection of you, or it is a world of your creation?
I I was reflecting on this just recently because I've been getting all these amazing questions from future readers who've been watching my journey. Gajarah it's this beautiful journey of Iman's life, and it has elements of fables. So there's this queen, Mungarani, who lives in the cosmos. And in a lot of ways, Mungarani is this person who Iman wants to be. So she's tapping into that inner sort of cosmic queen, if you will, to think about what she wants to be and where she wants to go and how she wants to fight the world and so on. And when I was writing Gajarah, I kept thinking what parts of myself I'm weaving into the story and thinking about when an artist creates something. I think in a lot of ways, what they end up creating has these little glimmers of who they are, like the voice is mine and the understandings of trauma, the making sense of trauma is very much how I have throughout my life wrestled with trauma. So in a lot of ways, I'm sharing with my readers what it could look like for them to heal from their trauma. So much like any other creative writer, I've, as we say, sprinkled little parts of myself into the book.
In your writing process, were there barriers or challenges that you needed to work through, or you needed to do any kind of preparation to make sure that your depiction is correct or closer to real life. Would you like to talk about that?
For sure. So when we write about trauma, in my work in trauma-informed care, trauma-informed dialogue, trauma-informed storytelling, there's this really important notion of being able to talk about trauma in a way that doesn't sensationalize trauma. And how do we do that in a manner that we don't trigger others or activate others? The challenge, though, is we don't know what anybody's triggers are. And everyone has their own story, their own lived experiences. So writing about trauma then can be very challenging in its own way. And by the same token, when I was writing some of the difficult stories, to then be able to unpack them, I needed to be very mindful of how I was feeling in the moment. How was my heart rate doing? How was my body feeling? How was my mind? How was my spirit feeling? And for me, writing this meant I had to be very mindful of my own self-care and take my time and also honor the creative writing process. Anyone who's written anything knows that I'm envious of folks who can get up at 7 a.m. and write till 9 and then maintain that sort of schedule. My journey was very meandering. There were days when I didn't write, and then there were days when I wrote for 12 hours at a time. So I just had to be mindful of where my mind was at and how I was feeling throughout the writing journey and honor that process and be mindful of it. And then, of course, I've always surrounded myself with folks who I lean on, friends, advisors, other individuals who I can talk to when I'm working through any sort of difficult content, if you will. So I was able to write it in a very sustainable manner and not as typically isolating as writing can be for some writers.
I think that as a writers, we have that responsibility that the messaging that we want to share with the world that makes the world a better place. Somehow share things that could be improved in the world we live in, the world we perceive, that sort of thing. And this is something I'm very curious to hear from you because in my understanding, I see a lot of hateful events
Mm.
and cultural references which is being created so as to we talked about triggers so as to making sure that the triggers are always alive, the triggers are always burning, the triggers are always perturbing people. So I want to hear from you as to what is your responsibility. How do you see your own responsibility towards your writing process? What is this messaging that you worked upon in your book or in general? Like, it doesn't have to be in context of the book. You are a writer, so you are way beyond the book. I'm just asking this as to the messaging that you want to live towards the world. We cannot change the world, but we can at least do our bits so that it can cascade. It just the legacy that we would be remembered by.
Yeah, thank you for that beautiful question, Brett. My work as a peace builder is very much rooted in holding space for people to share their story and bring their story to life. And in order for us to hold space for others to bring their story to life, we have to be ready to listen and truly listen to them and truly listen to what they're saying. So my overall message in the book is very much the opposite of a divisive message. It's very much an inclusive message of inclusive realities and inclusive ways of being. And when at the beginning of our conversation today, you mentioned that I was your first Pakistani guest, and there's so much there's always so much tension between nations and between different identities. I think in a lot of ways we carry that intergenerational trauma of division, and we carry those fears like deep in our place and deep in our bodies, and we carry that lack of trust and lack of understanding and lack of wanting to listen because we're afraid at some level that what if we listen and we take a step forward and we're hurt again, or we're destroyed again. And it's those fears that sit with us that make us worry and make us not want to work together. So the overall message through Gajarah is very much that when we're seeking a resolution to a conflict, there's no such thing as right or wrong. And that's a very challenging thing to say and to receive. There's no such thing as right or wrong when we're looking for a resolution to conflict. The resolution that we arrive at is what our understanding of the context is at the time. It reflects our historical way of being and understanding the historical context. It's also what is morally, ethically, religiously, culturally acceptable at the time. And it is also what we think the society that we're in is going to have the capacity to accept at the time. So the resolution is actually not right or wrong. It is a mix of all of those things. And that is the truth of what it looks like to come to a resolution, come to a place of agreement between different groups. So that is the main message. And I really hope that sort of sings loudly to people when they read Gajarah.
Yes, you mentioned the generational trauma, and I was about to come to that myself because I think that people in today's world, in it's sometimes it can be so shallow that identity is like, or ego is thought as identity, but not as self-awareness, like who we are today. We have inherited a lot of trauma, and it's something that the healing, I think it needs to work at our individual level as well as a bigger sort of community level. But instead of healing, instead of inclusivity, we are more focused on the divisive culture that is, let's say, in lack of better words, politically motivated in today's world. You are a peacekeeper yourself. This may not be just in relation to the book. I am curious to hear that what is your messaging? What are some of the philosophies that you believe in about peacekeeping, and that involves understanding ourselves and coming to terms with our past and our identities?
When you asked me that question about the story that came to my mind was years ago, I was supporting with alongside some of my colleagues. We were conducting these debrief sessions with some frontline humanitarian aid workers in the Ukraine when the Ukraine-Russia, the last version wave of that conflict started. And there was so much agony and so much grief in what people were experiencing, things they were seeing, as you can imagine, in any wartime. And so we would speak to them about what they were seeing, what they were experiencing. And essentially, really what we were doing was holding space for them to be able to express as opposed to just keep the traumas that were coming to be. And our goal there at the time was not, it was such an interesting time because we had these conversations about what is our goal? Like, what are we hoping to achieve here? And we concluded that if hate is going to be like a foot deep moving forward towards the other group, maybe, just maybe, by holding space for people to express and work through their trauma, maybe their hate is not a foot deep towards each other in the future, but maybe it's like 1 foot minus 1 inch deep. And maybe that is just a step in the right direction. So, all that to say, when we think about inherited trauma, yes, there's inherited trauma. Absolutely. We carry that. But we also carry inherited resilience. And when we're working in the world of peace building, we need to be mindful of how can we leverage those places of identity, those places of strength in people for them to be able to build on that strength for each other and them to be able to wrestle with the inherited trauma so that they can look forward, look beyond the trauma to then work together. The other thing I'll say is, yes, absolutely. There's lots of political motivations that push, that create and result in so many conflicts in the world. And also, it is convenient to think it's all political motivation. As humans, we have a lot of agency. I can choose to not hate someone from across the border. I can choose, despite my inherited trauma, to consider them a human being, to still love them, to still be kind, still be compassionate, still give them a glass of water if they're thirsty. That is very much my choice. So my work as a peace builder is to remind people that they do have agency, that they do have control over the reality. And yes, there are certain things we can't control, but at least let's exercise what we can control. And that is to treat each other with kindness, with respect, with humility, and with this drive to work together.
That is so heartwarming. And you mentioned this in the beginning that you were inspired by Sufi poetry, and I think the messaging is concurrent in some ways. Would you like to share anything about like how the Sufi poetry inspired you and if there are elements that we will find in your book?
Yeah. So there's lots of little elements in the book that are very much inspired by Sufi poetry. And there's actually a few excerpts of a couple of poems that have always felt very deeply personal to me. I think if anyone knows anything about Sufism and Sufi Kalam, I think they'll see the themes and the way that the book is written loudly through that reading process.
You have used both poetry and prose in your book. So, to conclude today's discussion, would you like to read any poetry from the book?
Yeah, sure. So I have this poem actually that I'll read. This is Iman wrestling with the idea of forgiveness. And she decides that maybe it's time for me to have a conversation with forgiveness. So this is that poem. Who are you, forgiveness? I have tried to be curious, to wonder, be patient. But I ask you with what burns inside me, the rage of a storm curling, agonizing inside me. Its winds churning questions, thick and fierce, blacks and grays. Its lightning flashing anger, white and raw. Who are you, forgiveness? Are you soft, something I can hold? Are you in me, somewhere I can find? Have we met before, perhaps? Would it make me small to feel you, or strong to give you away? Would the child in me understand you, what it means to let hurt walk free, to hold pain like a fragile feather, and blow it into the winds, watching it scatter, losing shape until it's only air in the sky? Who are you, forgiveness? Would inviting you mean letting go of this warmth I know so well, this spark, this anger that has protected me, its fire a light in my darkest times? Who are you, forgiveness? Would you reshape my scars, make them softer, something new? Or would you only hide the The ache beneath, like roots twisting in the soil, deep and unseen, but still there, whispering at night, a secret I carry. Who are you, forgiveness? Maybe, just maybe, you're not a single answer, but the strength to keep asking, the strength to hold my fury and my compassion as one, my love and my kindness as one, my hurt and my courage as one, my voice and my being as one, and know that all are mine, that all have built me whole, bit by bit.
It takes some time for that to sink in. It is so beautiful.
Thank you.
We touched upon some really wonderful and heartfelt topics. I would request everyone to take a look at Gajarah, and we will have all the links in the episode description. And I hope that they can relate to the book and the book speaks to them as well. It was a beautiful and heartfelt discussion, and we covered a lot of very important topics in today's world. We talked about the book, the writing, and the cultural identities. Then we talked about understanding trauma, not just our own, but what we inherit. And we talked about resilience that we inherit, and we talked about the philosophies of Sufism, the peace, and identities, and messaging towards a better tomorrow. To conclude our discussion today, is there anything you would like to say to our listeners?
Yeah, thank you so much, Abra. To the listeners, I'll just say thank you. Thank you for listening. As a storyteller, there's a very sacred relationship between a storyteller and a story listener. The more sacred that relationship, the easier it becomes for a storyteller to tell a story. So yes, there are some difficult themes in the book, but it's been written with a lot of care and compassion and kindness. And I hope that you can see that love come through when you read the book. I would love to hear from you what you think. And I'm sure Abra will share the relevant information about the book with you also. Thank you so much for listening. And thank you so much, Abra, for having me here today.